So in this video, I'm going to be talking about what your meals should look like when you're trying to end binge eating. Because when we've been binge eating for so long, we're either in feast or famine mode, restriction or overeating. We either eat like very, very little in the morning or try to diet as hard as possible in the daytime. And then in the evening, sometimes we have a massive binge eating episode. And then we sometimes have this thing called portion distortion. We don't actually know what a normal portion looks like. So starting off with what your plate should contain, it should contain carbs, protein, fats, and fiber. That should be the essentials in every single meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
So let's say last night you had a binge, you feel too full for breakfast. So we start with a mid-morning snack. So we can have chocolate balls, that's carbs and fats, Greek yogurt for protein, and banana slices for a bit more carbs and fiber. That's a balanced meal that's filling and satisfying. Then we could move on for lunch, which is a delicious sandwich of tuna and cucumber and crisps. Quite a balanced meal. And then moving on for a mid-afternoon snack. Then there's banana, great source of carbs and fiber, grapes, great source of carbs and a bit of fiber, chicken balls and cheese circles, more fat and protein. So once you hit protein, fats, carbs and fiber, becomes quite filling and satisfying. And also make sure the meals are delicious. That's why I love crisps, so I just keep on adding them to the meals. But make sure that you don't only have the crisps, but make them quite paired with other delicious meals. So over here, I love chocolate bars, adding a chocolate bar, but to make it quite filling and satisfying, I'm gonna add some Greek yogurt for more protein.
So when I was younger, I used to watch a show called Avatar: The Last Airbender. Essentially, it's where this main character called Aang has to master the 4 elements so he can defeat the Fire Lord. And he only knows wind, and that's not enough to defeat the Fire Lord, who's like the supreme overlord and the main boss, the final boss. And through the seasons, he learns fire, he learns water, he learns earthbending, so he can defeat the Fire Lord. Just the same thing if you like this analogy, because personally I like it. If you like this analogy, essentially, if you want to end binge eating, you can't have your meals as simply having carbohydrates, essentially just noodles or simply just pasta, and then there's nothing else. If you want to trigger fullness and satiety, comfortably full, then you need to contain like protein, fats, carbs, and fiber. The same thing with the same example I used earlier with Aang, the last airbender. When he wanted to defeat the Fire Lord, he needed to learn wind, earth, water, and fire. So now that we know what we should include in our plates with most meals and snacks, then now let's talk about when we should eat our meals. Because as I mentioned at the start of the video, when we try to struggle with binge eating and we'll struggle with restriction, extreme dieting, in a never-ending attempt essentially to make up for the previous binge, because you know the binge restrict cycle. We have a binge eating episode, we feel guilty, and then you want to jump onto a restrictive diet to make up for the binge. Our timings, our hunger cues could be so dysregulated. So oftentimes when you're skipping breakfast very often in an attempt to make up for the binge last night, or you're having very little for lunch, very little calories, essentially sometimes a salad in most cases, because that's essentially what I had. You're eating so little in the day, and then the evening, sometimes you have a massive binge eating episode. And our hunger cues, ghrelin and leptin, they work by a pattern. So if you're always telling your body like, okay, there's nothing coming in the morning time, and there's something massively coming in the evening time, then your body can get used to this pattern. So sometimes you might be saying like, okay, I'm not a breakfast person, so I don't really eat much. But are you actually not a breakfast person because you don't like breakfast, or are you actually not a breakfast person because your hunger cues are actually dysregulated? It's important to note that in our brains, we might know, okay, breakfast is 8 o'clock, lunch is 12 o'clock, dinner is around like 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock for most people. But our gut doesn't know that. So our gut works by a pattern, as I mentioned earlier. So if nothing's coming in breakfast, then your gut might be thinking, okay, there's nothing coming in. Oh, there's only one massive meal in the day, or like 2 bigger meals in the day. Okay, I'm going to prepare for that. And then sometimes in the evening time, when you try to go through your diet, eat almost like nothing in the morning and then a little lunch in the evening. Do you ever get that feeling where you get a massive surge of cravings out of nowhere? It just hits you like a truck. Essentially, like you have a massive craving for chocolates. So having this regulated time pattern of like not eating regular meals is actually working against you. So we need to reintroduce this thing called mechanical eating. So mechanical eating is eating regular meals every 3 to 4 hours. Because we know in our brains that breakfast is 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, and then lunch is mid-morning, and then evening is dinner, is the evening time. But our gut doesn't know that. So we need to train our gut gut to feel hungry once again at these certain times. So after a binge eating episode, try to be a 7 or 8 out of 10 full and try to eat regular meals. So that would look like breakfast, mid-morning snack, lunch, mid-afternoon snack, and dinner. And if you might be thinking, okay, that's so many calories, that's so much food in one go, that's essentially portion distortion, because maybe you've been having massive portions because you're so hungry most of the time that essentially you thought, okay, like if I try to eat regular meals little and often, it might seem like tons of calories, when essentially it's not. You're only splitting most of your calories throughout the day, so your hunger cues can understand when to feel hungry. Your gut will understand when to feel hungry, so you can tell our gut to re-regulate its gut clock, essentially, that okay, I'm gonna feel a little bit hungry for breakfast, a little bit hungry for mid-morning, a little bit hungry for lunch, and then when the evening comes, when mostly you have this massive craving for a binge, then you won't have that massive craving for a binge because you've satisfied comfortably your mechanical fullness. That's essentially mechanical eating in a nutshell. So now let's go to the topic of what your plate should look like. So now we should know that it should include protein, fats, carbs, and fiber, as I mentioned in the first point. But what should it like physically look like? So over here is a plate by plate approach. So the plate by plate approach goes by the idea that it's essential for you to include grains and starches, protein, vegetables and fruits, fats, and some dairy. So that will be consisting of a nourishing balanced meal. So that's essentially what a balanced meal looks like. The plate by plate approach has been recently developed, and it's really amazing for trying to restore your relationship with food, to re-regulate your hunger cues, to have a balanced nourished meal. And you can check the plate by plate approach on Instagram. They have amazing food examples. I'm gonna put some food examples right over here, so you can just go through like what does a typical meal look like that should essentially be nourishing and balanced. So over here are some examples of the plate by plate approach which I've taken from their Instagram. So I highly recommend that you follow the plate by plate approach on Instagram, because they give examples of how to have balanced meals, but at the same time how to have meals that are quite enjoyable. So rather than having pizza essentially, which is just protein and fats, not much carbs or vegetables and fruits, then you can have the pizza, but you can have a salad with it. So you can create a balanced meal and it'll trigger satiety and comfortable fullness. So having balanced, nourishing meals is essential if you want to restore your hunger cues, have a regular eating pattern, and reduce binge eating urges. And I highly recommend that you share this video. And if there's only one video I highly recommend that you watch if you're struggling with binge eating in my channel, is essentially this one, because we can all learn about like coping mechanisms. We can all learn about like all these tips and tricks on how to deal with urges or what to do afterwards. But if you don't have the framework of how to make a balanced, nourishing meal that satisfies your cravings and satisfies mechanical hunger, then it's going to be much more difficult with your binge eating recovery journey. So if you want to learn more about this, you can check the link in the description for my Fear Foods Reintroduction course, my binge eating newsletter, my one-to-one services, my self-paced online course, and many more. And I'll see you in the next video. See ya!